Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Thanks for being with us. A couple news items. Recently, the state paid for the special election. You remember that special election on June 29th. We had two constitutional amendments on the ballot. Both of them failed, and we just paid for the cost of that election, about $1.5 million paid by state government to counties around the state to pay for the cost of that election. Boy, that was a waste of money. Both of those amendments lost fairly soundly. The decision to have that special election in June was pretty much a partisan issue. Republicans said, by God, we ought to have that election in June. The Democrats basically said we ought to have it with either a school board election or the elections that just passed here this fall. But we didn't do that. We instead wasted $1.5 million of your money to run that election. And that was quite a waste. And I hope you remember next year election time who those folks were that decided we ought to spend that $1.5 million and reward those that didn't. That's a little news piece. It's November 15th. We are here this evening going to be discussing a campaign that's been underway in Iowa for the better part of the last few months, a campaign called Iowans for Sensible Priorities. And we're pleased to have with us the Iowa manager of that campaign, Peggy Huppert. Welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for being here. Iowans for Sensible Priorities. What are they up to, and what's this campaign all about?
Well, what this is all about, Iowans for Sensible Priorities, is actually a local entity of a national group called Business Leaders for Sensible Priorities. And it was started by Ben Cohen, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. Ben came to this a couple of ways. He had his own foundation at Ben & Jerry's, and they were getting so many more requests for really great projects, meeting really important needs that they couldn't fund. They were having to fund about 1 in every 10. He was serving on the board of the Children's Defense Fund and getting to understand the real needs of kids and families in this country that were not being met. And at the same time, he was on the board of the Center for Defense Information, which is a bunch of ex-military guys who are like watchdogs of the Pentagon, identifying all the waste and unneeded things that the Pentagon is spending money on and the influence of military contractors. And he said, hey, you know, we need to put these together. And how about if we cut some money out of the Pentagon budget, since it's half of all the money that Congress spends every year, and move that over into education and health care to try to meet some of these huge needs that are in the country. So that's where it came from.
Very good. So Ben's an ice cream maker,
yeah,
who's now become kind of a social activist and basically targeting what he believes to be waste in the defense budget for other purposes. We were at the State Fair, Iowa News and Views. Maybe some of our viewers got to the State Fair. It might be a good time to show a clip to give folks some sense of your display at the State Fair. It looked pretty successful in your efforts to collect some signatures. So if you can roll that video, we'll take a couple minutes and take a look at that.
Great.
All right, ready? All right. Good afternoon. We're still at the Iowa State Fair on the road, Iowa News and Views, and we're here to talk about what we see in our background. And who are we talking with?
My name is Jeffrey Weiss.
Jeffrey, what's going on here?
I work for an organization called Iowans for Sensible Priorities. It's a project of business leaders for sensible priorities. Paul Newman and 400 business leaders and retired military officials talking about federal budget priorities, in particular the need to, as you can see with the federal budget pie, to invest more money in health care, education, VA hospitals, the lower half of the discretionary budget, without raising taxes, but by moving a portion of the Pentagon budget, which right now takes 50 cents of every tax dollar.
All right, we're looking at some buckets on the ground behind us. What do those symbolize?
We give people 100 pennies. You see 10 areas of the federal budget, how it is divided, and people put pennies in the particular containers. If they would want 15 cents of the dollar to go towards education, they put 15 cents in there. So people are able to divide the federal budget pie how they want to. Right now, you know, there's a lot more money in education and health care. Our current federal budget, the next proposed budget by President Clinton, 54 cents of the dollar is going towards the Pentagon and only 6 cents to education. So the Iowa people have divided it up, I believe, 17 cents to the Pentagon and like 30 cents to education. So it's radically different from what Congress is currently proposing.
We would expect that, wouldn't we, fans? Here we are talking about Iowans for Sensible Priorities. Check it out. Sign that petition.
All right, Peggy, very interesting. So the people get 100 pennies, and Iowans think that we only should spend 17% on the Pentagon instead of 50%.
Yeah, we did that also on RAGBRAI. We took the bus on RAGBRAI. We have this Move Our Money bus covered in money. And we do the show with giant inflatables. It's really a very different kind of thing. And took it across RAGBRAI. Did that constantly. We were at the state fair for the whole run of the state fair. And then the bus went out on the road across the state to small towns, 40 different towns. And we never got a different result. In all the times of asking people to do that, education and health care were always the number 1 and 2 choices. The Pentagon never got over 20% of the dollar. So it shows us that Iowans are consistently saying that Congress are making the wrong choices on how they're spending our money.
So you've got kind of a road show, very visual. Your materials are very colorful, and you've been getting this message out. What are some of the elements of the campaign? I know you're collecting signatures.
Right, we did a petition. We've been doing a petition signature drive, and we did that during RAGBRAI. We got it was about 8,000 signatures from bike riders and people in the communities. And during the state fair, we got over 3,000, which was more than Vice President Gore and Governor Bush combined. They were trying to get signatures in support of their candidacies at the state fair. So we were proud that we outdid the 2 leading candidates. We now have about 18,000 signatures in support of moving 15% of the Pentagon budget into other areas like education and health care.
So let's talk about the defense budget. What are we currently spending on defense, and what would that 15% equal?
The budget that was just signed into law for the next the current federal fiscal year by President Clinton is $281 billion, and that includes most of the Energy Department because they do all the research and production for nuclear weapons. That's over 50% of the discretionary budget, which is the money that Congress actually allocates every year. And it's about 90% of what was being spent during the height of the Cold War. So even though the Soviet Union has been gone and the Cold War has been over for 10 years, we're still spending almost as much as we were during that time period, and still developing very expensive weapon systems that were designed to fight the Soviet Union.
So how can Congress be so out of step with, I don't imagine Iowans, they want to see less money spent on defense. My guess is in many other places we'd find that same thing. What's your sense about why?
Well, we just did a national poll, as a matter of fact, and we had done a poll last January which showed about a 65% agreement with our issue across gender, income, political ideology. We just did another poll and found about that same level. It's higher for women than men. About 75% of the women polled support this idea. So there's obviously a disconnect between what people think could or should happen and what's actually happening in Congress. In fact, each of the last 4 years, Congress has passed this incredibly huge part of our spending our tax money. They spend an average of 10 minutes debating it because it's all agreed to in the back rooms. And what that tells us is the influence of the military-industrial complex. The House Republicans actually tried to kill the F-22 this year because they said it was too expensive, it wasn't needed, and the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon, all the branches of the service came together and got it back in. So it just shows they're only going to produce 6 this year, but the pipeline is open, and you can bet that there'll be more next year.
I remember the debate about the F-22. People were astonished that it was decided either in the House or the Senate to basically shelve the project.
The House
It
killed
was like the first time that's ever happened.
It is. And, Jerry Lewis, who's a Republican from California and chair of the Armed Services Committee, said, we can't pay for this. There's too much money, and the Pentagon has to start realizing that they can't have every weapon system that they want. And, I guess the Pentagon showed them.
So let's talk about the caucuses a little bit. I know you're doing the signatures and trying to gather grassroots support there. We have the caucuses coming up.
Right.
Uh,
Well, that's why there's such a big emphasis in Iowa,
okay.
because we have a unique opportunity in Iowa to talk to candidates up close and personal that people nowhere else in the country have. I know my brother-in-law lives in San Diego, and he's just amazed by the access that we have. And so we should really take that seriously and make sure that we get to candidate events and ask them serious questions and hard questions about what they would do if they were elected president. So we're trying to raise the visibility of this issue, trying to get it into people's consciousness to raise it with the candidates. We hope that the media will write about it and do stories on it. And we want to inject this into the national debate.
So how's it going in terms of talking to candidates? You got on the Republican side, George W. Bush is obviously the main front runner, I guess, here in Iowa. And how about the Republican side first? Are you having much success in visiting with candidates?
We've had, all the candidates are very aware of our campaign. We have a cookie lady who is our mom, Move Our Money mom, who is really basically follows the candidates around the state, appears at all their events, and we have actual cookies that have our budget pie logo on them. So she hands cookies out to the press and to the candidates and to people at the events. We have had a lot of luck with getting volunteers to go to events and ask the priorities question. But all the Republican candidates have come out on record of supporting more money for the Pentagon, ranging from not really saying to Gary Bauer, who has said $60 billion a year increase.
Wow, they could heat with it, they just burn it.
Yeah, it'd have about the same effect. On the Democratic side, Vice President Gore was in Iowa last week and just announced that he favors more money for the Pentagon. He didn't say exactly how much more, but he also talked about the need to cut waste. I should say that John McCain on the Republican side, on his website, has a list of all the pork barrel, wasteful, and unneeded Pentagon spending.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know that email? Do you know his web address?
I think it's McCain 2000.
Right.
Don't know for sure.
McCain2000.com.
Look it up.
Look it up. Check it out.
Yeah. He wants more money for other areas of the military budget, but at least he's on the right track in talking about waste and unneeded spending, and is against some of the newer weapon systems. And he's the only Republican who's really talking about that. The Vice President Gore has talked about that, but it's still for more money. The only candidate who has talked at all about really seriously looking at Pentagon spending, reducing it, is Bill Bradley. And he has said he thinks we can keep spending even. He is against the F-22 and some of the other new weapon systems, but wants to put more money into readiness and salaries.
I see.
So, I think we've had some success in at least getting them to talk about it, and in many of their forums having to address it and answer the question.
Good. You're watching Iowa News and Views. We're just past halfway in the show. Iowans for Sensible Priorities has a website. We can throw that up there and check that out. They also have an 800 number if you're interested in getting some more information. We'll put that up a few times during the rest of the show so you can check it out. You're visiting with, I'm visiting with Peggy Huppert. Peggy is the Iowa campaign manager for Iowans for Sensible Priorities, a group trying to raise our awareness around the state regarding issues of federal spending and defense. One other news item I forgot about was this issue of raising the speed limit. We're going to think about doing a show on that, whether or not people should be driving fast or not in Iowa. It's one of those fresh new Republican ideas to help us all get places faster. I think it's kind of an interesting one. Peggy, thanks for being here. You're getting some response from the Republicans and the Democrats regarding this. Sounds like Bill Bradley might be most interested, Senator McCain as well. What's the next piece of this effort in terms of the caucuses? You're talking to candidates now, they're speaking to it. How does this play out on caucus night?
Well, we're doing several events. First of all, we have a mailing list now of over 16,000 names of Iowans, and we have a listserv of about 1,500 names. So it's a pretty powerful communications tool. These are all people who support the issue, obviously. And so we're going to be doing a dinner and pre-caucus training in Des Moines on November 29th called Priorities in a Land of Plenty. We're really working with the religious folks over the holy days in December, from Thanksgiving to New Year's, talking about the moral imperative to be concerned about this issue.
Okay.
We're going to get churches involved. So we're doing this dinner at a church, and we're doing a pre-caucus training that will tell people how they can be effective in going to candidate events, asking questions, going to the forums that are being held a lot between now and the caucuses. And then we're going to be doing another caucus training in January for folks who are interested in actually going to their caucus, and we want them to introduce our priorities issue as a resolution.
Okay.
So we're going to be activating this
like
group of people,
quite an
which,
effort.
yeah,
Sure.
which definitely has the interest of the candidates.
You've brought a couple of your commercials with you
Yeah.
tonight, and we'd like to go to that.
Good.
A way that the campaign's trying to get the word out about Iowans for Sensible
Yeah,
Priorities.
we have about a $350,000 paid ad budget, and we're going to be up with TV ads pretty much continuously between now and the caucuses.
Very good. Let's see that first ad, Nathan.
When all the budget shenanigans are said and done, this is how Congress really spends our tax dollars. 4 cents for health care, 6 cents for education, 50 cents for the Pentagon. Respected military advisors agree that we can reduce the Pentagon budget by 15% and still maintain the strongest military in the world, bar none. That's $40 billion we could be spending on our kids. Let's get the candidates to talk about the real issues.
We're back. So you've got some military people coming out in this ad talking about
We do.
we can do what we need to do with less money.
Right, we have a group of military advisors. In fact, Captain Jim Bush, who was a 26-year Navy veteran, retired submarine captain, was in Iowa last week, making the rounds with media, talking about over Veterans Day that this is an important issue. It's not unpatriotic to talk about it and bring it up. We have Colonel David Hackworth, who's the most decorated living American veteran, and quite a few others, saying, you know, we can do this without hurting our military at all. So that's the pie ad.
Good, bringing some credibility to this campaign. Let's roll the next ad.
Okay.
One nuclear weapon destroys any city. 1,000 nuclear weapons destroy every city. 2,000 nuclear weapons, nuclear winter worldwide. The U.S. has 12,000 nuclear weapons. Tell the presidential candidates, the Cold War is over. Invest in kids, not nuclear weapons.
Wow, that's a powerful message there.
It is. Yeah, and we've gotten quite a bit of interest. In fact, CNN did a story on that as part of a piece on controversial issue ads around the country. Yeah.
So 12,000, I think we got enough.
Yeah, I'd say enough to destroy the world many times over.
Now you've also run some radio. You have some radio ads that was
Yeah.
also supported by a postcard. I've got a copy of a postcard here and it says ho 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 and it says Santa Kaufman. What's going on with this postcard?
Yeah, this is a little spoof that we did. It was about a takeoff on the decision on the F-22. We sent out it's an early Christmas card from Vance Kaufman, who is the CEO of Lockheed Martin, thanking Iowa taxpayers for, again, sending millions of dollars Lockheed Martin's way to produce a weapon system that's not needed. And we did a radio ad that we put out in WHO Radio in Des Moines that they ran for a while and then pulled the ad when Mr. Kaufman called and asked them to pull it.
All right, well let's go to that ad and we can come
Okay.
back and talk a bit about it. We're getting ready to hear a radio ad, audio tape. It's coming up here. This is an ad running on WHO, or was running on WHO radio.
Christmas came a little early here at Lockheed Martin, and we want to say thanks to every Iowa taxpayer for making it possible. This is Vance Kaufman, CEO of Lockheed Martin, one of the world's biggest defense contractors. And if it weren't for your tax dollars, we'd be out of business. Last year alone, the Pentagon sent $13 billion our way. We're celebrating now because Congress just voted to send us more money to keep working on the F-22. And we know that's a waste of money, especially when Congress has to shortchange our schools and health care for our kids to pay for it. But the bottom line is, our bottom line comes first. So as the holidays approach, remember, it's better to give than to receive. And when you see all those federal taxes coming out of your next paycheck, remember, you're giving, and we at Lockheed Martin are receiving.
Paid for by Iowans for Sensible Priorities.
Well, that's a fairly hard-hitting radio ad as well. Kind of clever.
Yeah, we thought it was. But Mr. Coffin was afraid that people would actually think that was him. So, you know, I don't know what you have to do to qualify for parody, but apparently you have to be a little bit more outrageous than that. So we're doing a protest tomorrow at WHO Studios in Des Moines to let them know that we don't think they should have pulled it.
So you want to try and get this ad back on?
We're trying to get it back on. I'm probably not going to be successful, but, you know, it just shows the power of corporate interests and speaking to other corporate interests.
So the caucuses are a great opportunity with the presidential folks coming to town. What about our congressional delegation and a more broad effort to get focus on these questions? Or do we have any support in our congressional delegation?
We do. Certainly our senators, both of our senators, Grassley and Harkin, have been pretty active on this issue and really outspoken over the years. And Congressman Leach has been pretty active and supportive. I can't say the rest of the congressional delegation has been particularly supportive. But that's the focus for next year in the campaign, is to bring this into key congressional races around the country as an issue, interjected as an issue for the 2000 elections.
So in the campaign then, the broader picture, the caucuses are coming, but the campaign continues on through next November?
Right.
Is that right?
The goal of the campaign always has been to try to affect some change by 2001. So we hope we'll see that happen.
That'd be great. So we've been giving your website and your 800 phone number. What kind of response are you getting from citizens?
Well, everywhere we go, whether it's a state fair or RAGBRAI or farmers markets, we went to the fish concert in Ames and got 1,300 signatures from fish fans. Young people especially, college age and 20-something people have been really receptive to this. And you know, their common response is, well, yeah, it makes sense. Why don't we just do it? So we're trying to see if we can make that happen. To a lot of people, it just does make sense. So we have to solve that disconnect between that and what Congress is actually doing. Do
you think this is a generational issue in some ways? Or are you finding that? Or?
Yeah, I think it is. You'll find a huge difference between World War II generation and, you know, the college age and even the baby boomers tend to be more receptive to this. And I think it's just a matter that, you know, the world has changed. The Cold War has been over for 10 years. But the people running the country and the Pentagon, mainly, you know, white males over the age of 55, haven't gotten over the Cold War mentality, and they're still making decisions based on that. And we have a new reality. We have new threats that they really aren't addressing. And we need to get them to change their way of thinking.
So there's a huge appetite for this money in these defense programs and hardware. And
well, I know when Captain Bush and I went around the state, everywhere we went, they talked about schools. And many communities have a local option sales tax. We're having one in Polk County again soon. And we have needs. 79% of Iowa schools need work on huge infrastructure needs. $3.5 billion worth of needs. And local school districts don't have that money, and neither does the state. So what we're saying is, if we got this $40 billion movement of money, Iowa's share of that would be about $460 million, just based on population. Even if we got a portion of that back, it can make a huge difference on our ability to meet needs here in the state. Because right now we're sending the equivalent of 65% of our state budget to the Pentagon every year. And hardly any of that comes back to Iowa.
Right, it's a huge waste of Iowans' money. And as you point out, the crumbling schools issue is a huge issue. Not to mention uninsured kids and
Yeah,
environmental
11,000, yeah.
quality. Tons of
Yeah.
stuff that we could use that
We
money
can't
for.
afford to monitor our water quality. We can't, there's all kinds of things. And with our farm economy kind of going downhill right now, you know, I don't think the state is going to be able to afford a whole lot of new initiatives. I think we're going to be lucky to hold on to what we have.
I think you're right. Peggy, we're down to about the last minute and a half here. Any final comments to the average Iowa viewer of Iowa News and Views on how to get involved here?
Well, I would urge everyone to, you know, take a look at our website, to give us a call if they'd like more information. There'll be a lot of opportunities to get involved. I think that people have to not feel like they can't have a voice on this issue. That's really what we're about. Just because the Pentagon says that we need this money, or Lockheed Martin or Boeing says that we need to spend this money, doesn't mean we need to. And I think it's time for people to have their voices heard and say, enough is enough. This is our tax money, and we should be having a say in how it's spent. And there should be more than 10 minutes of debate on the floor of Congress over how to spend $280 billion.
Very good, very good. Peggy Huppert, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Peggy Huppert, the campaign manager for Iowans for Sensible Priorities. Get out there, and when those presidential candidates come to your town, ask them what they are going to do about how to reorganize our priorities to kids and schools and education and away from some of these weapons of destruction. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. Appreciate you joining us. Remember, this is just a TV program. What's important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make it a better place. Peggy's working around the state on some issues that are going to make a difference. Now it's your turn. We'll see you next time.